Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. You know what I'm going to tell you? These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country. But this time, it's me telling you that. That's what we do at 10 a.m. Let's get into it. President Trump issues an ultimatum to Hamas ordering the release of all hostages or, quote, all hell is going to break loose. What that means for the tenuous ceasefire deal and ongoing negotiations is anybody's guess, but we're going to dig into it. And at least one person is dead after two jets crashed on an Arizona runway. What we know about the fatal collision. Plus, President Trump's Justice Department is moving to drop the bribery charges against indicted New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Why the administration is shutting down the case. This is CBS News 24/7. Let's start out with the war in the Middle East this morning. Hamas is shrugging off the president's demand that the group release all of its remaining hostages by this weekend or, quote, all hell will break out. That is a quote from the president of the United States. It comes as the King of Jordan will be at the White House today, a nation that could be critical to President Trump's larger plans for the region. I want to bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes to break this all down. Nancy, I heard your reporting this morning on CBS Mornings, where it took a lot of people by surprise what the president said about Hamas and this ultimatum that he delivered. Does anybody understand or know what he's signaling by saying that all hell will break out?
I don't think they do, Vlad, partly because this was an off-the-cuff remark that was made in response to a reporter's question in the Oval Office. It didn't appear to be something that he had planned to say. And so how serious is he? No one really knows. And that's part of the strategy with this Trump administration is to leave adversaries guessing about whether he really means it or not. And so now we've got 4 days to find out, because this deadline that he set is for Hamas to release the hostages by noon on Saturday. He says if they don't do it, all hell is going to break out. We don't know exactly what that means. He added that he believes that most of the remaining hostages are dead. Which would ostensibly make it harder to release them. But nevertheless, this is what the president has said. And it's another thing that he said, Vlad, that is probably going to create some tension in his meeting here at the White House with the King of Jordan in just about an hour and a half, because in an interview with Fox News, when he was asked whether Palestinians would have a right to return to Gaza under his vision of taking ownership of the territory and causing all of the Palestinians to leave while he rebuilt it into a beautiful set of resorts on the Mediterranean. He said, no, they wouldn't have the right to come back. They'd be very happy living somewhere else. And that is not the way that the King of Jordan and leader of Egypt and other Middle Eastern leaders see things going. Some of them have described that proposal as ethnic cleansing. So we'll see whether these two men get into it today, especially with foreign aid for Jordan apparently on the line.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see, Nancy, when this weekend comes, if Hamas follows through with the president's ultimatum or if they don't. And then it's sort of the ball is in the president's court. If he doesn't do whatever it is that he's signaling that he'll do, he'll seem weak, and yet it doesn't appear that there's a strategy to do anything if Hamas doesn't meet that deadline. So we'll, of course, be watching. The other thing that I thought was interesting, Nancy, was the president was asked who his successor was, and you would think that it would be the vice president of the United States. Instead, the president said something very interesting and very different.
Right. He said, no, I don't necessarily see J.D. Vance as my successor. I do not see him as my successor. Basically, he said the vice president's only been on the job for a few weeks, so let's see. He doesn't want to tip his hand now when there are 4 years to go before the election. It's a fairly unorthodox response from a president of the United States. Normally, they'd sort of pay lip service at the very least to the person who they've chosen as their number two. He didn't criticize his vice president in any way. He just said there's a lot of people who are going to want that job, and he thinks that the vice president's doing a good job for right now, but let's see.
Yeah, it was interesting, Nancy. I took a look at some of the headlines of newspapers in France, and they're all sort of making a point to highlight those comments, given that the vice president was in Paris for that AI conference. So while perhaps the rest of the world isn't paying that much attention to it, certainly the country that the vice president is visiting, one of our key allies, is. Nancy Cordes for us at the White House. Nancy, wait, real quick, Nancy, is there going to be a press conference between the president and with the King of Jordan at some point later today?
There is not a press conference scheduled, and it's eagle-eyed of you to pick up on that, because there was a press conference when the leader of Japan was here. There was a press conference when the leader of Israel was here. No press conference this time, which could be a reflection of the fact that you wouldn't anticipate that the King of Jordan would be able to express support for this Gaza plan that President Trump has laid out. So it wouldn't be a great PR move for either one of them. The White House hasn't said why they're not doing it. All we know is we'll get a glimpse of them saying hello, saying goodbye, but no formal press conference.
Yeah, it will be interesting, Nancy, given that there isn't a press conference when the two are sitting in that room for that photo op. I know you and the rest of the press corps will shout some questions, and we'll see if either of those men respond. If I know the president, he probably might. So we'll be watching. Thank you, Nancy.
We'll do our best.
Thanks, Nance. All right, back to that situation in the Middle East. In Israel, there has been mixed reaction to President Trump's warning to Hamas. Listen to this.
I think the most important thing is to get back our people to Israel and not push it and not threaten the Hamas, because that's not the way.
To say that we're going to squash you and kill you even more plays into Hamas's hands and plays out of our hands.
I think this is a pattern that you make some highly outrageous statement and then you back down from it. You back down from it to something more moderate.
All right. Meanwhile, demonstrators have been protesting outside of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office in Jerusalem this morning. They are calling for an end to the war and the release of all the remaining hostages. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay has more.
Well, the news of Hamas halting hostage releases is just devastating to both Israelis and Palestinians, as it means the ceasefire is once again in jeopardy. The Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said he's readying forces in Gaza. Now, families of Israeli hostages blocked traffic in Tel Aviv. They're panicked by Hamas halting more hostage releases like the one last weekend. And they're distraught after seeing the condition they were in. They came home with news both welcome and distressing. Hostage Alon Ohel is alive but starving with untreated wounds and bound in chains. That's according to his mother, who made an impassioned plea to President Trump to do everything in his power to bring her son home. In the past 4 weeks, the now imperiled ceasefire has brought home hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and allowed hundreds of thousands of Gazans to return to what's left of their homes in the north of the Gaza Strip. Those gains are now in jeopardy, with Gazans beginning to stock up on supplies for fear that war will return. Here in Tel Aviv, Israelis are just distraught over the 76 hostages still held by Hamas. And today, the Israeli military announced that the oldest one of them, 86-year-old Shlomo Mansour, was murdered in captivity. He was a survivor of the 1941 pogrom in Iraq, where hundreds were killed in an anti-Semitic riot. Back to you.
Just tragic. Chris Livesay, thank you very much. The NTSB is investigating the deadly crash at an airport in Scottsdale, Arizona. This video shows the moment that a private jet hit a parked plane as it was attempting to land. At least one person died and 3 people were injured. I want to bring in CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleef for the very latest. So, Chris, good to see you. What are investigators saying about the crash at this time?
Well, Vlad, the NTSB investigation really just getting underway here. As you know, those tend to be a long process. So we're at the very beginning of that. We do know that 2 people were rushed to trauma centers here with critical injuries after this crash. A 5th person essentially walked away from it, declined medical transport to a hospital after being checked out here. So in total, 5 people, 1 person killed, 2 critically injured, a 3rd taken to the hospital with what was described as non-life-threatening injuries, and 1 person lucky enough to essentially walk away from this collision. The plane was coming in from Austin. It is a private jet owned by Vince Neil. He is the lead singer of Motley Crue. He was not on board the airplane at the time. And basically what it appears happened, the plane touched down as it was coming down the runway. It appears the left rear landing gear collapsed, causing the plane to veer off the runway. Some preliminary flight data shows it was going about 63 miles an hour or so as it went off the runway and collided with that parked private jet.
Chris, quickly, how often does the FAA require private jets to be inspected and to receive maintenance?
Well, that really depends on what kind of maintenance. You know, there are light maintenance checks, there are heavy maintenance checks, so it depends on usage. You know, how many hours the plane has been in the air, how many cycles are on the engine and the gear. So it's not like every month. It really depends on use of the aircraft.
All right, Chris Van Cleef for us. Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate it, my friend. All right, let's talk about the Justice Department, which is ordering prosecutors to drop that federal corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. He faces 5 charges, including bribery and fraud. CBS News New York reporter Christina Fan has more.
Good morning. The mayor's made it no secret. He's been trying to cultivate a close relationship with President Trump for months now. A couple weeks ago, the Department of Justice met up with members of the mayor's legal team and Manhattan federal prosecutors to discuss the possibility of dropping this case, and now it has finally happened. In a memo that was released yesterday, the Justice Department cited 2 main reasons for dismissal. Number 1 was bad timing, that the case improperly interfered with Mayor Adams's campaign in the 2025 mayoral election. And number 2, it interferes with the mayor's ability to cooperate with President Trump's immigration crackdown. The mayor's defense attorney, Alex Spiro, took an immediate victory lap, saying, quote, "As I said from the outset, the mayor is innocent and he would prevail. Today, he has." The Justice Department's decision to dismiss the corruption charges was roundly criticized by candidates challenging Adams in the Democratic primary this year. But the mayor's predecessor, Bill de Blasio, said the evidence was weak to begin with. Adams has made repeated overtures to the president since the election. The two first met in Florida before Trump took office. Then Adams suddenly canceled several appearances at MLK Day events to attend the inauguration. And he also flew in for the National Day of Prayer breakfast with the president. The case isn't a done deal just yet. Adams still has to agree in writing that prosecutors can revisit this case after the November election. And the federal judge in this case also has to agree to dismiss these charges. Reporting from Gracie Mansion, Christina Fan, CBS News, New York.
All right, Anna Schechter joins us now. She's the senior coordinating producer for CBS News' Crime and Public Safety Unit. Good to see you, Anna.
Great to be with you, Vlad.
All right, so let's talk about this. Explain the reasoning. The Department of Justice says they're not even looking at the merits of the case,
That's
so
right.
that doesn't make a lot of sense to people who are watching.
They're not questioning at all the merits of the case, the integrity of the investigation, or even the facts laid out, which accuse Mayor Adams of bribery and corruption, and even pushing through a consulate for the Turkish government in New York City without the safety requirements needed. So these are an elaborate array of charges, and it involves millions of dollars of, inappropriate funds allegedly going to his mayoral campaign. But what the Justice Department is saying now under the Trump administration is saying the timing is wrong. He's got an election coming up in November for mayor. As you know, he is not leading in the polls, but that election's coming up. They note that. But really, what it seems to me in my read of that memorandum, the real reason is because they want Mayor Adams to be able to devote his full attention to Trump's immigration crackdown. And what does that mean? Devoting resources to these ICE raids to help support federal agents locating undocumented people. The focus is on people with a criminal record and deporting them. We've reported on CBS News that Trump has not been happy that the numbers aren't higher, so that plays into it. We also know Mayor Adams has gone down to Mar-a-Lago to curry favor, an appearance of currying favor with President Trump. He also got a last-minute invite to the inauguration and attended. So it's really just a story that's gripped New York City and the country.
So It sounds as if the rule of law and accountability for the mayor is out the door, out the window, and what's in is this sort of quid pro quo where it's the Justice Department says, we're not even going to look at what you're accused of. We're just going to say that these charges should be dropped so that you can focus on what the president wants you to do. New York City is a sanctuary city. The mayor can devote whatever attention he wants to the president's policies, but it sounds like he's going to be in lockstep. And if he isn't, then I wonder what happens to those charges.
Well, it opens the door. You make a really great point, because in the memorandum, it's dismissed in a way that allows prosecutors to revisit the charges after the election. So the legal experts that I'm talking to say, well, that's even more political. Trump is testing Adams to say, if you fall in line enough, we might make this go away, but if you don't, we could bring these charges back. So it's really an incredibly unprecedented scenario that we're seeing unfold right now as we're talking.
Unbelievable. All right, Anna Schechter for us. Always great to have you here in studio.
Great
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, winter storms are expected to bring snow, extreme cold, and travel warnings across the United States. The first storm has already triggered a state of emergency in Virginia. Midwest is also bracing for snow and ice tonight. The third will plow into the West Coast on Thursday. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. The first look at the national forecast. Hi, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, look, a very active pattern, and this is the second of a series of storms that are going to be traversing the entire United States. Let's zoom out here. Let me show you the map here. Let me put on the radar so you can see what the storm is and what we're tracking right now. We've got snow to the north. You've got rain and even some severe weather to the south. Let's put on the forecast radar here as we go through the rest of the day, and you'll see how this storm will be advancing to the east. It moves up into the northeast, and eventually it'll clear the coast. But you see already developing in its track is a potentially larger system, certainly for the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, and then up into portions of the Great Lakes states as well. Let me show you the forecast snow totals with this as we go through the first storm, all right? So that's what's painting on the map right now. Some of these forecast totals, anywhere from Philadelphia down into West Virginia, will range from 3 to potentially as much as nearly a foot. We're talking 9 inches in some places in the central Appalachians. So a lot of snow is on the way. In fact, a lot of people underneath this impact for weather. We're talking nearly 50 to 60 million people impacted by winter weather over the next couple of days. Vlad will track the second system, and we'll give you the latest on those forecast totals in just a little bit. Back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. Vice President J.D. Vance details the administration's AI goals and policies, coming up what he told an international audience about President Trump's top priorities. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Vice President J.D. Vance just delivered a keynote address at an AI summit in France. He called America the gold standard, and he promised to keep it that way. He also challenged the idea AI could make people less productive. CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi has more from Paris.
Vice President J.D. Vance just addressed world leaders and top tech executives today at the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit in Paris, France, where he said he's not focused on AI safety, but AI opportunity. Vance said he wants to continue to see job growth as it relates to artificial intelligence development in the U.S. so that America can continue to be the gold standard.
AI, I really believe, will facilitate and make people more productive. It is not going to replace human beings. It will never replace human beings. And I think too many of the leaders in the AI industry, when they talk about this fear of replacing workers, I think they really miss the point. AI, we believe, is going to make us more productive, more prosperous, and more free.
Now, Vance also said the Trump administration believes that excess regulation in the AI sector could lead to a burden on this industry that is just growing, and he wants to see a, quote, deregulatory flavor make its way through the AI summit. The vice president also railed against EU censorship of American tech companies, saying, quote, it is one thing to prevent a predator from preying on a child on the internet, and it is something quite different to prevent a grown man or woman from accessing an opinion that the government thinks is misinformation. Vance also issued a warning to U.S. adversaries, saying that the Trump administration will not stand for countries that have, quote, weaponized AI software to rewrite history, surveil users, and censor speech. The vice president also cautioned that AI must remain free from ideological bias. Now, the vice president is also heading to several bilateral meetings today with the head of the EU, but also French President Macron, where the topic of tariffs could come up. Back to you.
All right, Olivia, thank you. About 60 countries signed onto a statement on inclusive and sustainable AI for the people and the planet at the summit. The United States was not one of them. All right, a major shakeup is sweeping through the Department of Justice within President Trump's first 100 days in office. A group of current FBI agents is suing the DOJ and the FBI, who say the review of their work on January 6 cases are potential retaliation. But the agents may not be the only targets of the investigation. I want to bring in CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, what about the U.S. attorneys?
Yeah, Vlad, this is what it looks like when another domino falls over in a set of dominoes, political and legal. Legal sources and Department of Justice sources speaking to CBS News say there is concern now that there will be some form of a purge, more firings, more forced resignations or retirements among U.S. attorney prosecutors, assistant U.S. attorneys across the country who have any fingerprints on the January 6 cases. And those cases were so voluminous, they came so many so quickly, there were assistant U.S. attorneys brought into Washington to help prosecute them from all across the country. There's already been employment action against some of those prosecutors. The new U.S. attorney in Washington, the Trump appointee, got rid of a handful of those prosecutors in late January. Now there's concern that'll expand because of this retribution effort against the January 6 prosecutions. You'll recall, Vlad, the Trump appointee at the Department of Justice has characterized the January 6 investigations and prosecutions as a, quote, grave injustice. That has not been held up by the courts as a true statement, but nevertheless, it has started these dominoes collapsing where FBI agents who investigated are on a list, possibly to be fired. Prosecutors who are in the courtroom, some have been fired, more are concerned about being fired. What you're doing there, Vlad, is potentially gutting the offices that are in place to help protect Americans from federal crimes, gun crimes, drug crimes, sexual misconduct, child predators, and terrorism.
What a list, Scott. And as you know, the courts have blocked some of the major Trump initiatives, prompting both the president and the vice president to take aim at the judiciary branch of the U.S. government. What are you hearing from lawmakers, from your sources about this pull between the White House and the DOJ? Because at the end of the day, our founding fathers set up three co-equal branches of government. People keep forgetting. It seems as if people who have law degrees, and I don't have one, who went to very fancy law schools, keep suggesting that the president of the United States has the power to subjugate the judiciary if he doesn't like their rulings. And that's just not the way our system of government is set up.
Yeah, that's going to be put to the test, but we're not going to get the results to that exam today or this week. These are going to be months-long battles. We have dozens of suits now filed against the Trump administration by interested parties, by organizations, by nonprofits, by those affected by the decisions. Those are going to go through the court system in a time that you measure in months or years, not in days or weeks. These will be challenged at the appeals court level by whichever side doesn't prevail. So when the vice president says it may not be in the court's jurisdiction to adjudicate these cases, that'll be tested too. But this is a long process. There are appeals courts for this. There is a Supreme Court for this. I think the more immediate concern, Vlad, is the test between the Department of Justice, the Trump administration, and those on-the-ground agents right now. There is 3 weeks into the administration, this concern that Trump administration is defanging the investigators. FBI agents are on a blackball list. Prosecutors are worried for their job. 15 inspectors general, which audit and investigate federal misconduct, have been fired. There is a concern that a message has been sent. Do not investigate any old case. Make sure it's okay with us when you do. That is a destabilizing and norm-shattering moment in American Justice Department and law enforcement history.
And Scott, final question. I mean, we haven't even talked about how Elon Musk fits into this equation. This is an unelected individual who has no accounting skills, as far as I can tell. Certainly, perhaps smart and some other business aptitudes that he's put to use in his career. But what I think is interesting to me is the fact that he's investigating organizations, turning the firepower of X onto organizations and people that he doesn't like. And some of those organizations he has business dealings with. In many cases, They are there to regulate some of his business interests, and that doesn't seem to have raised a red flag from the DOJ or even lawmakers of the president's party.
It's quite a contrast, Vlad, as the Trump administration kind of neuters its investigative agencies, from the Department of Justice to the inspectors general to the auditors of government, and hands that auditing, investigating power over to Elon Musk. The bigger question is there a political price to pay? Right now, Vlad, no Republican kickback to that shift.
Scott McFarland with some really troubling reporting for us. Scott, thank you very much. All right, despite some concerns from both parties, two of President Trump's more controversial cabinet nominees are on track to be confirmed this week. We're following the latest. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We have breaking news. Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has just pleaded guilty to an alleged fraud case in New York City. He is charged with fraud in the so-called We Build the Wall scheme. These state charges include money laundering and conspiracy. He's making some comments there. We will listen in to what he is saying, and we're going to check in a little bit later with our Katrina Kaufman, who was in the courtroom. Meanwhile, a federal judge is blocking 3 Venezuelan immigrants from being transferred to the Guantanamo Bay naval base. Part of the base is being used as a facility to house migrant detainees as part of the president's mass deportation plan. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is live from the Pentagon. Charlie, what are the lawyers for the 3 men arguing?
Hey, Vlad, the lawyers had been challenging the legality of detaining the men in the first place. This is already underway, so the judge had already been overseeing that lawsuit. Where it became more complicated, and when we started paying attention, was it was decided that the men would be transferred from a facility in New Mexico to Guantanamo Bay, which you and I have previously discussed. Those flights to Gitmo are already underway. The plan is to set up a detention facility for as many as 30,000 migrants. That was under an executive order from President Trump. So this temporarily blocks that transfer. But it just sort of highlights the complexities of this deportation. There are questions about whether the men in custody may have been part of that Venezuelan cartel, again, that you and I have discussed. That would make them high-risk detainees. The problem arises from the dozens of undocumented detainees already sent to Gitmo, what status they're going to have going forward. We know a prison was set up there specifically to hold al-Qaeda suspects after 9/11, and around a dozen or so, maybe less than that, suspects are still being held. In his decision, federal judge Kenneth Gonzalez wrote, there is uncertainty involving the jurisdiction. It should be noted, though, this is specifically for these 3 individuals, so not the legality of the whole process. But again, it just sort of reflects the muddy waters going forward once they scale up to literally tens of thousands of migrants. Like, how do you resettle them? What's their status in the meantime? And can they be held legally, and for how long?
All important questions that you're raising there, Charlie. In the meantime, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is on his first major international trip as Defense Secretary. What is he doing in Europe?
Oh, my gosh, where do we begin? So he's there to meet with NATO partners for the first time. Anybody from this administration will be meeting with NATO partners there. There's a lot to discuss. So he'll be going to Poland, he'll be going to Germany, and going to Brussels for that NATO summit. The top of that agenda will be what to do about Ukraine. Now, there is a presidential drawdown authority that is still in effect, about $4 billion worth of U.S. aid that is headed out to Ukraine. They could put the brakes on that, but I think what we're going to see here is the same sort of messaging that the Trump administration has been saying to NATO partners, saying, look, you have got to invest more into NATO. Some NATO partners are well below that 5%, 3% GDP. Some are above 5%, notably countries like Poland, where he is going to visit. There's a large U.S. contingent of U.S. troops in Poland, also in Germany. There will also be a meeting of the Ukraine Contact Group. Now, this was created by the former Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. There were questions as to whether that group would continue and how involved the United States would be. So this time, for the first time, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, is hosting that particular summit. So as it's been described here, he's going to listen, not necessarily to make these broad sweeping statements, and then sort of figure out the state of play as we move forward.
All right, Charlie D'Agata for us at the Pentagon. Charlie, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right, the president's pick for director of national intelligence is one step closer to joining the president's cabinet. Tulsi Gabbard had become one of the more controversial of the president's nominees over her past travels to Syria, comments that she made about Syria, comments that she'd made about Russia. Now, she could be confirmed before the end of the day after getting through a committee vote last night. I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns to talk about this. So I saw a tweet from Senator Lisa Murkowski. Caitlin, where was she, let's say, 2 weeks ago? What questions did she have, and why is she now saying that she's going to confirm?
Yeah, Vlad, you read my mind. She has been a wild card in all of this, and she announced yesterday that she has gotten to yes on Tulsi Gabbard. She said that she still has concerns about some of her positions, but she is also comfortable with the way in which Gabbard has said she wants to rein in DNI. What is significant here, Vlad, is that this was one of the most endangered nominees that President Trump had. And now there is not a single Republican who has indicated that they are planning to vote against her when she comes up for a full Senate vote tonight, or I should say early tomorrow morning, past midnight. And this is significant because Trump is likely to get all of his major cabinet picks through this difficult nomination process. So as controversial as Gabbard was, even among some Republicans, I mean, some of the toughest questioning in her confirmation hearing actually came from Republicans. At this point, at least, heading into her vote, they're all on board.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. You would think that on one hand, Caitlin, that some of these senators are thinking to themselves that the president is only going to be there for one term. And so the fact that he is not able to run for re-election would give them some cover to vote their conscience. On the other, I think that they're also reading the tea leaves and saying to themselves, look, I've gotten threats. Lawmakers who have not toed the line have gotten threats from Elon Musk as he sicks his ex-army on lawmakers. And frankly, they want to keep their jobs and they don't want to get primaried. So it's sort of interesting to see how that dynamic is playing out. And so with most of the president's cabinet picks getting through, what are Democrats able to do as far as they're not able to block these or oppose these? Well, they can oppose them, but they can't block these nominations. But are they able to at least slow it down while they try to beat back some of the president's more controversial executive orders?
Yeah, well, they're certainly trying to, Vlad, and you make a good point, which is that Democrats really don't have a lot of leverage here since they are in the minority. And when it comes to confirming these cabinet positions, they just need a simple majority to push them forward. So not a simple majority, but a majority of the Senate. What is fascinating here, though, is the way in which Democrats are trying to kind of use leverage points that they have. So they can delay some of these nominees. We saw this with Trump's pick to run the FBI, Kash Patel, for example. His nomination, his confirmation has been pushed back a week. But really, there's not much else they can do. And we've actually seen on some of these less controversial ones, you have seen some Democrats come over and support the nominee. We saw a little bit of that with the Treasury Secretary, for example, and even Pam Bondi got a Democratic vote. But by and large, Democrats don't have a lot of leverage here. What they are trying to do kind of more broadly, Vlad, is exert power where they can and also look at ways that they can get their messaging out. So you're seeing a lot of town halls where they're trying to, gin up public response to what Trump is doing on a variety of fronts. You're also seeing them back a lot of these legal challenges to the executive orders, and that's kind of where they stand here. The big question, though, is how they do on the budget negotiations coming up soon.
All right, Caitlin, as always, we thank you. Appreciate it. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is testifying in front of lawmakers today. He's expected to face questions ranging from rate policies to department's independence from President Trump. I want to bring in CBS News contributor J.D. Durkin for more on this. So, J.D., what are you expecting to hear from Powell today?
Hey, Vlad, good morning. Well, really, we're trying to get a better sense of that roadmap, the blueprint for the path forward on short-term interest rates. Gauging from the opening testimony of Chairman Powell a short time ago, he's telling lawmakers today and tomorrow, because this is a two-day, a semi-annual testimony he gives to both chambers on Capitol Hill, basically saying, look, the central bank, we're not really in a hurry to lower interest rates any further. We will stay data dependent, likely going on to underscore a lot of the more positive elements that he sees in the U.S. economy. Vlad, unemployment rates still near a historic low of 4%. It indicates that he's seeing that supply and demand in the labor market be in better balance. Although inflation is still somewhat elevated from where they would like it to be, it's kind of a hurry up and wait type of situation. Right now, market participants are really only expecting one short-term interest rate cut between now and the end of 2025. Interesting to note for me personally, Vlad, in Chairman Powell's opening statement, no explicit reference to Donald Trump tariffs, though certainly that will be a point of contention and conversation today and tomorrow during those pretty interesting back and forths with lawmakers.
I wouldn't expect that chairman to have a lot of comments on the president's tariff policy, but I would expect folks on Wall Street have some thoughts on these potential tariffs. JD, I get it that it's great to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It's great to consider buying Greenland and invading Canada, but the tariffs and the long-term effects on the U.S. economy are certainly going to be of concern to the major players on Wall Street. What are you hearing from them?
Well, we've seen a lot of knee-jerk reactions just the last few weeks alone, and you got to think here, Vlad, some of the most important or the most consolidated names in the S&P 500 are companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, even Tesla, of course, owned by Elon Musk. They're all really exposed to China. They get a lot of revenue from China. So as you have these kind of knee-jerk reactions to every little tariff announcement, you will usually see a lot of those companies go down into the right, go down into the green, and they tend to pull the overall market along with it. A lot of economists I've spoken with, they're quick to highlight the challenges, the problems with using tariffs to offset income tax. Tariffs may be politically popular, this kind of let's get China type of moment, but tariffs, of course, as we know, they are an additional tax on consumers, especially on working class Americans. All of us who rely, whether we realize it or not, are buying goods that are coming into this country and are imported from places like Mexico, Canada, and China. Vlad, we lived through this for the first Trump administration. A lot of those knee-jerk reactions on Wall Street to every little announcement. And for good or for bad, I certainly expect that to be the case during the second Trump term moving forward.
Yeah, it's a good point that you raised, JD. The fact that needs to be hammered home that these tariffs are imposed at the port of entry, which is in the United States. And oftentimes those tariffs, the raise in tariffs, are priced and passed on to consumers. An excellent point as always. JD Durkin, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, weather now. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Hi, Grant.
Hey, Vlad. Look, winter weather living up to its name this week with several rounds of winter storms moving across the country. Let me show you the second one. We had one over the weekend. Now we're on to round two, and this one already bringing quite a bit of snow to the Ohio Valley and already moving into the mid-Atlantic. But look, I mean, you look down south, and we've got quite a bit of rain moving across the mid-Mississippi Valley all the way down to the Texas border. This will continue. In fact, a lot of people across the United States will be impacted by this winter weather over the next couple of days. 85 million people underneath some sort of winter alert, be that a winter storm warning, winter weather advisory, or even an ice storm warning, which we'll talk about in just a minute, across the central Appalachians. But we also have a severe threat to the storm as the second storm moves through parts of the deep south into the lower Mississippi Valley as we go into tomorrow afternoon and into tomorrow evening, with that slight risk across Louisiana into Mississippi and Alabama. The impacts are going to be far-reaching. Some places could see between 5 to 10 inches of snow. You've got an ice threat across the central Appalachians. And then you've got that second storm system moving into the Great Lakes states. That will bring upwards of nearly a foot of snow in some places. The atmosphere recharges, and you've got an atmospheric river lining up over on the West Coast as we head into Friday and into the weekend. Let's talk snow. The first one starts to bring the mid-Atlantic snow today, and then you've got that second system bringing snow from the Midwest into the upper Great Lakes states into the day tomorrow. A lot of snow, Vlad. Several rounds of it. Again, nearly 12 inches of snow in parts of northern Michigan. Back to you.
Oh, boy. All right. Grant Gilmore, thank you very much. Still ahead, former President Trump advisor Steve Bannon just pleaded guilty to defrauding donors in a border wall scheme. What we know about the deal he made with prosecutors. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. As we reported, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has just pleaded guilty in a New York City courtroom. He's charged with fraud in the so-called We Build a Wall scheme. CBS News political reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman has been in court following this and joins me now to talk about it. So Katrina, first of all, what is the We Build the Wall scheme? People need to understand what that is because it's been out of the public eye for a bit.
Vlad, so basically this was a scheme where Steve Bannon, along with a few other people, raised over $25 million. And it was intended to, they said, build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. They were going to do it privately, and they did ultimately build about 3 miles of wall. But the accusations here are that they were funneling money to the CEO of this organization in particular, and the 3 other people were already sentenced to prison in a federal in a federal case. But at the time, Steve Bannon was pardoned by President Trump. That was during his first presidency. So New York then brought these charges against Steve Bannon in this state case that we just had the hearing for now.
So what do we know about this plea deal?
Steve Bannon pled guilty for a conditional discharge. So he pled guilty to scheming to defraud in the first degree, which was one of 5 counts that he was charged with. And in exchange, he can't serve as the director of a nonprofit in New York. He also can't raise money for charities with assets in the state. And an additional aspect to this is that he's not allowed to use any of the donor data because they got hundreds of thousands of donations from hundreds of thousands of people in the scheme. So he can't use or sell any of that data, Vlad.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, downtown New York City for us, breaking it all down. Appreciate it as always, Katrina. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, folks, much more ahead. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The Philadelphia Eagles receiving a hero's welcome as they return home fresh off their Super Bowl win. The players had a police escort as they greeted fans along the streets of Philly, but noticeably missing was MVP and quarterback Jalen Hurts. Here's why. Instead of heading back to the city of brotherly love, Hurts went south to where else? Disney World. Crowds of fans cheered him on as he passed in a parade float with Mickey and other characters. He'll be back in Philly on Friday when the city is hosting its victory parade. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Grant, is the studio going to be dark on Friday? Are you going to even be here to talk to me?
Everybody's going to be on Broad Street, for the parade, right? For sure. We will be here, of course, but, probably most of our coworkers are going to be down there with the parade. But between now and then, look, not just here in Philadelphia, but a good 85 million people are going to have to deal with winter weather as 2 storm systems move across the country, the first of which is already in the works, moving across the eastern half of the United States. This storm system is going to bring snow from the Appalachians up to the northeast with a lot of rain to the south. Meanwhile, the second system develops right in its wake, but the track will be a little farther to the north, bringing a lot of snow to the Midwestern states, into the Great Lakes states as we go through the day tomorrow. Even some severe weather across the lower Mississippi Valley, across the southeast as we go through tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening. And then just more storm systems in the works coming in off of the Pacific Ocean to bring another atmospheric river event to the west coast. Snowfall totals again. Round 1's going to be the mid-Atlantic and northeast with that 5 to 7 over portions of Virginia into eastern West Virginia, and then upwards of nearly a foot of snow in some places of the lower peninsula of Michigan. Ice a big concern across the central Appalachians there. Look at that, nearly a half inch to maybe even more than a half inch of ice, Vlad. That could take down a lot of trees and power lines. Back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That does it for me, folks, but join me again here at 10 o'clock. After the break, though, Elizabeth Cook is live from San Fran with all the breaking news coast to coast.